Welcome, everyone, and welcome back to those of you who have joined us for our previous conversations on the 2Gen investment case, making the most of capital in all its forms. I'm Marjorie Sims. I'm Managing Director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our second webinar on our 2Gen investment series. This particular webinar is focused on the role of business as employers and as partners in supporting practices, programs, and policies that really center community. I have three experts here from across the public and private sector to offer a broad perspective on community-centered public-private partnerships, particularly focused on the role of business. Before we start, please let me acknowledge that the Aspen offices are headquartered at the Institute's office in Washington, D.C., which is situated on and adjacent to ancestral lands. We recognize the peoples of that are native to our community, the Anacostan, Piscataway, Sispactucket, Nantucket, and Pecombe peoples. All of these ancestral people are native to our community and have a vibrant community here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we recognize the peoples of our campus in Aspen, Colorado, the Ute people. We know that land acknowledgements are just a way to honor and recognize Indigenous history. And at Ascend, we strive to continuously and transparently recognize and celebrate how we all benefit from Indigenous wisdom and culture. We encourage you to visit the website of our colleagues at the Center for Native American Youth, who are sharing resources and tools on their work on Indigenous, communities and with families throughout this month. In transition to our webinar, we look forward to a respectful, robust conversation. To this end, participants will be muted throughout the session. There is a Q&A box that you can add questions to throughout the webinar. We aim to have a time at the end for about 3 rounds of Q&A towards the end of the webinar. We are recording the webinar and we'll follow up with materials from today's webinar with you. So first, let me now introduce our speakers. Albert Fuller is the president and CEO of Integrated Packaging Company Corporation, one of the largest African-American-owned manufacturing firms in the U.S. Founded in 1992, IPC specializes in corrugated packaging and point-of-purchase displays. Under Fuller's leadership, IPC has grown to employ over 200 people, many from historically economically disadvantaged communities. He served as a family prosperity advisor for Ascend. He is deeply committed to public-private partnerships and community development. He has served as a member of the U.S. Secretary of Commerce's Manufacturing Council Advisory Board, advising on national manufacturing policies. In 2012, he was included in the Social Venture Network Hall of Fame for Social Entrepreneurs. ICP was named Supplier of the Year by Procter & Gamble in 2008 and received the Minority Supplier of the Year award from the National Minority Supplier Development Council in 2006. Albert, thank you for joining us. Nitzan Pelman is the founder of Climb Higher, a workforce organization that helps job seekers on low incomes build social capital and in-demand skills, significantly increasing their earnings potential across their lifespan. Her sister organization, Climb Together, helps colleges, universities, schools, districts, and companies develop a social capital strategy and relevant content so that students, job seekers, and learners can leverage relationships and secure great jobs. Nitzan has also built an AI social capital bot so that students can improve their relationship building skills. Inspired by her time as an entrepreneur in residence at LinkedIn, she has raised over $20 million for work supporting people with low incomes find jobs. Thank you, Nitzan, for the work that you're doing, and we're really pleased that you're here today. And rounding out our panel is Dr. Nicole Witherbee. She is the president and CEO of the John T. Gorman Foundation, a Portland, Maine-based philanthropic organization dedicated to improving the lives of low-income Mainers. She joined the foundation in 2011 as Chief Program Officer, where she led its programmatic work and initiatives and was appointed President and CEO in 2022. With a PhD in social policy from the Heller School of Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University, Nicole has a long-standing commitment to policy and community change. Before joining the foundation, she founded a consulting firm advising on policy matters, analyzed federal budget impacts at the Maine Center for Economic Policy. She also directed policy for the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless and served as interim government affairs director for the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Nicole has such a rich history in supporting people and communities. We're so delighted that she's able to join us today in this conversation. So our conversation today really is centered on how businesses and partnerships with businesses can foster stronger communities and stronger outcomes for families, children and their families. The two-generation approach is an approach that Ascend has supported and advanced for over a decade now. And just simply put, I know most of you that are joining us today are really familiar with the two-generation approach, but I just really want to center that two-generation approaches build family well-being by intentionally and simultaneously working with children and the adults in their lives together. We have championed this two-generation approach because that we recognize that breaking the cycle of poverty requires supporting both children and their parents together and across generations. Two-generation approaches are inherent in Indigenous communities here and around the globe because they center the family and center family voice and in the design, implementation of practices, systems, and programs, and they drive equity towards those solutions. Two-generation approaches also are about offering space for community-centered public-private partnerships because of shared goals of for family well-being and long-term economic success. The need for cross-sector coordination, especially in education, workforce development, childcare, housing, economic assets, is really, really important. And we need to create spaces for large-scale systems change across those areas. And we believe that public-private partnerships that center communities is an important way to do that. So last month, we released the report, the 2Gen investment case, and we'll put a link in the chat so that you have access to that. But what we documented is that over the last decade, over $500 million has been invested by the private sector as well as the public sector in two-generation pilots and initiatives. We wanted to capture that and document all of those pilots and initiatives because we think that there's a lot of rich learning in the report and across all of those pilots and initiatives. And central to that is that making certain that we are aligning funding with measurable outcomes for both children and their caregivers, parents at the same time, to ensure that those investments are addressing intergenerational challenges and promote family well-being. Other learnings included that cross-sector collaboration is essential to all of these efforts. And by aligning those investments, we will have stronger outcomes for families. Agile evaluation is also really critical. So with that backdrop around two-generation approaches, as well as a quick summary of some of the lessons learned from the two-gen investment case, I would love to open up this conversation and talk more deeply with Nitzan, Al, and Nicole about what public-private partnerships really look like in their communities and in their work. So I'm going to start first with Al and ask, Al, would you mind sharing a little bit more context about the work that you're doing, where you're working in communities, and some of the goals that you have when establishing public-private partnerships?
Thank you, Marjorie, and thanks for inviting me to join the conversation today. We are inner city manufacturers in a for-profit business, so that's kind of a misnomer because we are a social benefits company, but we are also a for-profit company. We tend to intentionally locate our businesses either in inner cities or in urban environments, which means that we draw from a population that makes most of our employees historically underutilized individuals. Tough challenge because our customer base is some of the most advanced CPGs, consumer product groups, in the world. So our largest customer is Amazon. And so if you know that, then you know kind of what we do for a living. So we have to figure out a way to bridge what is sometimes a gap in terms of learning and skill set from a historically underutilized workforce and marry it to a large customer group that wants state-of-the-art value, quality, sustainability. And to do that, we've got to make money so that we can be a continuous operation. Big challenge. We've been able to do it now since 1992 continuously, but we can't do it alone because for-profit is a real thing. You've got to make enough money to pay your employees. You've got to make enough money to pay all of your bills, and you've got to make enough money in order to be sustainable over time. What we've tried to do is really analyze how we can get our customers what they want and at the same time give our employees what they need. The old doing good and doing well at the same time. We've used public-private partnerships mostly in the education side of the business. And I'll give you a quick example. Most of our hourly workforce is non-college educated. They come into our business, high school, 75%, 25% GED, probably 30% with some type of a felony, misdemeanor, criminal charge that they've had to get out from under, so they've been away from school for a while. So we have to take them through a training protocol in order to get them able to do the kind of quality, sustainability, process work our customers demand. And we've got a great relationship with a local college where they come in and in our factory do periodic quarterly workshops on things like sustainability, Six Sigma, ISO, which is the quality standard that most of the big corporations, lean manufacturing. And these are things that they wouldn't technically be trained for, and we couldn't really afford to pay for if we didn't have the partnership with the third party college
that's
that
really
comes in and helps us
helpful.
out. And
Really
and
helpful.
those kind of things, you can't really get your customers involved in changing lives, but you can get them involved in buying good products and services from a community that desperately needs the employment. So sometimes those third parties really help us go and do those
Yeah.
things.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Al. I really appreciate those specific examples that that you were able to share. So let me now go to Nitzan. If you could situate us where you're located and the work that you're doing, how many people are you supporting and serving? That would be really helpful. Welcome, Nitzan.
Thank you. My name is Nitzan. I'm an Ascend Fellow, or alum of the fellowship. Actually, when I was in the fellowship now, like a bunch of years ago, I was working at LinkedIn. And when I was there, they put a referral button on their platform. And what they learned by doing that was that the vast majority of job seekers were getting jobs through referrals, and relationships. Um, and that really kind of like made me think a lot more about one, how I had gotten all of my jobs, which was also through relationships and referrals. And I had really never internalized what a privilege that is to have access to a network and have access to people who had jobs that wanted to hire me for them. But second, that when I was then looking in the education space and in the workforce upskilling space, it seemed like most organizations or most institutions were focusing much of their time on training people on in-demand skills. And while I think that that's very valuable and important, it's really just half of the equation. Those people are going to finish those either college programs, community college 4-year, or workforce upskilling programs and have, some newfound knowledge and potentially newfound skills, but they're still novices. And if they don't have connections or relationships to sort of have somebody take a risk or take that, first hire, it's hard to sort of get those opportunities from just applying cold to jobs. And so I started a workforce upskilling organization called Climb Higher. I'm based in the Bay Area, Northern California. It started locally. We were training people out of the LinkedIn offices in San Francisco. And then within one semester, COVID hit, and we had to figure out how to sort of do all of this training online. I didn't believe you could build any social capital on Zoom, and I couldn't have been more incorrect about that. But what COVID really helped us do was think about how to essentially be able to train and provide this upskilling plus social capital building work anywhere across the country. And so I ran that organization for 6 years. We taught in-demand skills, specifically Salesforce administration. We taught program manager roles. We taught some finance roles, the SIE, which was specifically for the financial community. We've since taught cybersecurity, IT, just many different opportunities as we've seen what the demand in the marketplace looks like. And then we build relationships with companies that essentially need that kind of worker or employee. And in a big part of what we do and did was teach the art of relationship building alongside of these skills. And so, how to answer that very first question, tell me about yourself, or how to ask great questions that are open-ended when you meet somebody new, or how to demonstrate that you're an active listener, how to follow up, how to find similarities with somebody that might not look like you or come from your background. All of these are critical skills, and they'll become even more important in the era of AI, where it's so easy to apply for jobs, but it's also so easy for AI to screen you out of an applicant process. And so just those relationships are going to become even more and more and more important. And especially as younger people spend more time on social media, more time playing video games online, I find that those social skills are maybe even more lacking than ever before. Digital natives like really, really need a lot of this learning and development. And so I left Climb Higher about a year ago and handed the reins to my successor so that I could start a new organization called Climb Together that essentially brings all of this social capital curriculum, this content to your colleges, 4-year colleges, other workforce organizations, to employers, And so we're partnering with organizations across the country and in Nicole State in Maine to essentially help them teach the art of relationship building, with the goal of having learners and students both tap into the networks that they already might have but might not be as cognizant of in their local communities. Like, if you lived in Al's neighborhood, like, you would be able to be tapping into Al and you might not think about that. But also the alumni of your institutions. We know statistically that only 9% of alum generally are engaged with their alma maters. This is just like a very underutilized, incredible resource that students and job seekers could be reaching out and could be building relationships and could be unlocking referrals. And so we have a curriculum that we've now that we train in person, but also can offer asynchronously online. And we built an AI social capital bot that helps learners practice a lot of how to engage with people and ultimately reach out to people and write them notes on LinkedIn to start getting in real life conversations going.
Yeah, wonderful. Nitzan, I so appreciate the work that you're doing to build social capital, because we call that the secret sauce of the two-generation approach. And you just, really helped illuminate how critical that is, for success in business and in life, right? So thank you. And I'm excited to come back to you with some more specific questions about the work that you're doing. So Nicole, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and being a strong partner to Ascend and the work that you're doing. I'd love to learn more about, the focus of the foundation now and some of what you're seeing in terms of community public-private partnerships.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here because I think it's such an important conversation. That I think stems from all the great work that Ascend is doing. It's great to be in partnership with you. So our foundation, which is focused in, is in Portland, Maine, but we support organizations across the entire state. We focus on kids, but with the recognition that you only get to better child outcomes if the caretakers and adults in their lives have the resources and tools that they need. And so we don't operate like a traditional foundation in the sense that we're not really looking just for good programs to fund. We are instead trying to develop new strategies or adopt new strategies that come from other places where they're seeing some success and help organizations implement those so we can test them and try to perfect them and make sure that families have what they need. And I think because we work in that way, partnership is incredibly important. And there's really three ways that we think about that. And I'll give you three quick examples in each of those categories. One is kind of fundamental to how we operate, which is one example would be an initiative that we are working on for women of color to improve birth outcomes. And so we had at one point the city of Portland, Maine come to us and say, we have a number of women who are here in the community seeking asylum by themselves, pregnant. We don't have enough shelter. We don't have enough hotels. Can you help? Well, we're less likely to be able to just fund hotel rooms. We can do a little bit of that, but that really doesn't get at the problem. So the way that we operate is to start building partnerships that can help deliver the kinds of support that is needed. And so what we did was say, okay, well, we know that women of color disproportionately have poorer birth outcomes, and we want to change that. So we went to one of our local hospitals and said, looking at your data, we see that there's a real discrepancy here. Would you like to work with us on coming up with some strategies? They said yes. We then knew we needed housing as one of the things that was going to be really complicated and expensive. So we went to our partners at the state and said, you've got this funding currently available for emergency shelter space. Could you use some of that to help us purchase this building, or a nonprofit to purchase this building that could house women who are pregnant or who have just had babies? And they agreed to. So we ended up pulling in partnerships with the state, with our local hospital, with a housing developer, who actually ended up purchasing the property with money from the state. And then we went to a nonprofit and said, you know, you are training doulas and doing a lot of this work with immigrant women anyway. Could we bring you into this initiative and have you provide 24-hour support staffing with doulas? And so we're testing a number of different strategies. We also pulled in a few local businesses, including Unum and Androscoggin Bank, who support the initiative through volunteers that come in and work with the women on resume building and practicing their English language skills. So that's one way in which that's kind of fundamental to how we work, is trying to develop those partnerships. Another is also important, but a little bit more transactional. And an example of that would be a recent program-related investment that we made to help residents of a mobile home park purchase the land they have their homes on, because private equity firms were coming in to Maine and purchasing these properties, raising the rents sky high, leaving people who may own their home but not their land with, in many cases, no choice but to actually leave their home there. And so we were able to work with Bangor Savings Bank, which is a local community bank here, and others to help unlock some private capital to ensure that they could make a loan. We made a loan and a grant to to buy down interest rates so that they could get their rents to only be $100 increase per month rather than the $400 it otherwise might have been. And then the third, which I think is one of the most important, is more systemic. So we are part of an initiative called Whole Family Approach to Jobs. And that is an effort across all 6 New England states. Each state has a team, and the teams are comprised of funders, legislators, administrators from the state, providers, parents who are participating in many of the programs, and businesses. And that's so important to do because each of us brings a different perspective, but we all could recognize problems that impact us, and it's the same. So for instance, we've been working on benefit cliffs because businesses may have a employee that's doing great work and they'd like to give them a raise or a promotion. And sometimes they can't, because if they do, maybe that employee is a parent who takes that promotion, that extra income, and now they lose their health insurance. And the business isn't able to provide health insurance, so they're getting state-funded Medicaid. And they have children who may have chronic illnesses. So there's all kinds of reasons that for businesses, for states, for providers, parents, it's really we're all in it for the same reason, slightly different, but we all have the same problem. And when we come together, we can deal with that. And because we had all those different perspectives at the table, we were much more successful at moving legislation in the state to actually change a lot of the ways in which social services are delivered. And we have been part of a larger group of people across New England who have been working on federal change.
Wonderful. Nicole, those were such excellent examples of how philanthropy can play, a role of just a trusted broker at all levels of government and across communities, with the nonprofit sector, the private sector, public sector, to really collaborate in a way that is supporting families in your community. So thank you so much for those examples. And I'd love to come back to you and just, hear a little bit more about the benefits cliff work, because I think that is really important to a lot of communities across the country. But I want to come back to Al. You had mentioned earlier in your opening some ways in which you were partnering with, other companies to support needs of your workers. And I would love to learn a little bit more about, as, a business that is, as you said, needs to meet the bottom line. How do you support your workers, and what are you learning about different strategies that might support workers? Because, our work world is changing. And so how are you keeping pace with that, but still supporting your workers?
So a huge question, especially our work world is changing portion, Marjorie, given the fact that we are a recognized MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, which is a certification you get. And 10 years ago, you got it based on your impact in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. Now, today, if you say you've got a business based on anything that has to do with diversity, equity, or inclusion, you probably either get thrown out of the office you're in, or the person really cuts you off of the Zoom because it's kind of a bad word. So we've had to still deliver what we've always delivered, which is a opportunity to bridge and show corporate America that they can get value-oriented product and services from diverse communities, but we've had to change how we talk about it recently. So instead of talking about minority empowerment, we spend most of our time talking about community improvement. Instead of talking about a diverse workforce, we talk about low-wage workers or non-degreed workers.
I see.
Right. And then we always now lead with the value proposition. We lead with the value proposition. We've got the benefit of having done this for a while. We've got the benefit of having some really large institutions support us from a customer standpoint. And then we let our social benefit model, be the icing on that already baked cake. So it's a really tougher conversation, especially for social entrepreneurs right now, because people are hearing it through a different filter. But we found, because the work is just and the work is important and the results are evident, if we change how we talk about it a little bit, we can still go about empowering, laddering, and training same way we've done for the last 35 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for lifting up the importance of centering on your values and what that means to strengthen your work and your relationship with your workers. Really, really important. And also how, sometimes these terms, can mean different things to different people, but really centering on what the community's needs are is also equally important. So thank you for sharing that. So Nitzan, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to bring you back into the conversation and learn a little bit more about some of the ways in which you partner, and especially around building social capital with businesses that your clients may want to be employed with. How are you doing that? How are those partnerships shaping out? And how do you make certain that your workers are those that you're training are well suited to enter into those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Al and Nicole, like the world only goes round for us on partnerships and sort of like building these intersections of relationships. So, when we started this work, we began a partnership with LinkedIn and with Google and with Salesforce, all sort of like in different ways. LinkedIn had offered us space so that we could teach the learners. Google became like an early supporter in this work to sort of launch it. And then they started to really help leverage their network of potential employers. And they were building quite a number of employers that they wanted to hire people from our communities who had sort of taken various certification programs. And so they started to broker connections to employers who were looking for talent. Because we taught Salesforce administration for about 5 years, and Salesforce administration was like a really great economic mobility machine for quite some time. And we saw many of our learners go from earning $20,000 or $30,000 to earning well above 50 or 60,000. We built a lot of individual relationships all over Salesforce, and specifically people who were interacting with clients. Like Salesforce as a company didn't need to hire Salesforce administrators. They had, all the resources they needed, but anybody who owns Salesforce licenses knows that you need somebody who manages that whole thing. And oftentimes many more than just one person who manages it, so that they can, onboard users, they can customize the CRM tool. And so we started to build relationships with the account executive teams and the customer success teams. Those were teams that touched clients every day who were using Salesforce. And they would learn about our learners and, offer them job opportunities, or they would come onto our monthly social capital happy hours, and they would practice like how to engage with people who, maybe had never met a middle-class professional who worked at a company like LinkedIn or Google or Salesforce. And so first we engaged them through practice and through interacting with our learners. And then oftentimes they would, fall in love and want to, support our learners in their own job acquisition process. And that's really how you begin to leverage social capital. We also engaged our alum, people who had gotten jobs successfully at companies, and then they would refer the next set of learners that they had met through our program that came after them, and they would refer them into jobs. So we had many different partners over the years. We continue to, obviously, we relied, heavily on both the employers and on philanthropy and the state and government to support this work in order to make it operational. And so, what we found is that our philanthropic supporters were also, helping on the employer partnership side. They were helping us find learners. And so you could have many multifaceted ways to engage both with the business community, with the philanthropic community, with the community that had learners who wanted to, get this kind of training. So there were, many different ways that we built partnerships over the years and continue to. And in my work at Climb Together, the newer organization that I've been building for the last year, we now have partnerships all over the country with colleges, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, and other workforce organizations, and also beginning to have employer relationships as well, all of whom sort of recognize that social capital and relationship building is not really taught oftentimes, and yet it is so critical, and it's how people get jobs and how relationships really make the world go round. Is at the heart of this conversation. And so we've been building partnerships with colleges and helping them sort of learn this content, embedded in their curriculum, embedded it with their faculty, embedded it with their student success, with their career centers. And so, we've been building systems level partnerships. That means that we can be accessing and serving, hundreds of thousands of learners, as opposed to, the number of people that we were serving directly, which would never, make it to that hundreds of thousands of numbers. And so leveraging partnerships so that you have a far bigger set of impact is also really exciting, and sort of a different level of partnership.
Wonderful. And so I hear just very loud and clearly the importance of, building and sustaining relationships at all levels, and making certain that you're nurturing those for, common goals, across communities. So thank you for that. And so Nicole, I want to now broaden the conversation a little bit. You shared, a number of examples about how you, built relationships and nurtured them. But I want to know, what do you think is the most important ingredient in partnerships and building partnerships?
I think the most important thing is knowing what your goals are and being transparent about that. Because I think often we come into relationships with this, we want to try to work on X, but we don't say to what end.
Yeah.
And that is so important because I think you can get lost in process, and potential partners, a lot of businesses, they don't have time to invest in, and not just businesses, organizations don't have time to invest in a long process to figure out what your goals might be at the end. So understanding what you're trying to achieve and knowing that you share that goal, just helps you always kind of stay disciplined. And people really appreciate that. So I think it's really being clear, transparent, and committed to a goal keeps everybody talking and walking in the same direction.
Wonderful. So making certain that there's goal alignment, there's values alignment, and you're transparent. Really important. Thank you. So I'll love to know your thoughts on, what makes for strong partnerships, for you. During, our preparation for this webinar, we had talked, a little bit internally about, the hours that a business, owner in the private sector has to keep, and what does that mean for establishing, partnerships with the nonprofit sector or the public sector. Can you share some of your thoughts on what makes for strong partnerships and how you enter into them?
I think Nicole said it in a very eloquent way. I would just break it down to trust. And trust is really the key in terms of these kind of partnerships. And she talked a little bit about alignment in terms of making sure that you're aligned. It's difficult in the for-profit versus the not-for-profit world because our alignment is relatively singular in terms of the fact that we've got to go out and, for the sake of sustainability, we've got to be focused on making profit. It's an important goal. But because a lot of that takes between, if you're a 2-shift operation, 6 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock at night. And if you're an entrepreneur, which means you're the driver of the vision and strategy and sometimes chief cook and bottle washer, your time is spent in that business. And, I've spent a fair amount of time over the years in the nonprofit world, and those conversations are held more circular, more strategic level, and normally in that same 9 to 5 window. So it's hard to get the time to build trust. But I would say this: there is a real need for business to have those conversations, because I think businesses, if they had those conversations, could figure out a way to do more in a 2-gen approach with families and with employees if they had that level of support from third party, not-for-profits or government associations. But the time element is tough and critical at the same time.
Sure. Well, that reminds me of an African proverb that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go with others, right? And that's what these partnerships are about. So thank you for that. And we have a comment from Janine McMahon, who actually is one of our parent advisors. She's based in Connecticut. And she says that, partnerships are really important, for fostering community, and including the voice of community as well as especially the voices of parents is critical. So I'm curious, for any one of you, how are you making certain that in partnerships, how you think about partnerships, you're really either centering the voice of community, centering the voice of your employees or workers or your clients? How is that surfacing in the way that you're thinking about establishing partnerships that really have included their voice and their recommendations? And that's a question for any one of you.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I couldn't agree more. I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the change that we want to create that we rely on assumptions, and those aren't always correct assumptions. And so if you don't have the people at the table who are actually most impacted, you really do risk going off the rails. And so there are, I think that, honestly, we could do a better job of it. I think we're working towards making sure that in a lot of our conversations, we're including parents who are impacted by programs we're funding. We've just hired a new research associate to start collecting data, not only from the actual providers that are doing the work, but the people who might be participating in the program to make sure they feel like they're getting what they need and it's effective. But we've also started funding, creating funds for the state, for various departments and agencies at the state level to have advisory councils, because they've found it so complicated to actually figure out how to pay for parent participants or family participants. And we can help with that. We've figured out how to do it. And so that's another way that I think it's really important. Whether you have the ability to do that, as a foundation, we can, but to make sure that other entities, especially government, which really actually may need it the most sometimes because they're so removed, by nature, have the opportunity to do that as well.
Well, that is a very unique, interesting partnership right there, right? So you're partnering with the public sector to make certain that the community voice is included in the decision-making processes. Very, very nice. Thank you. Nitzan or Al, anything to add on that?
We designed our program so that the alumni of the organization who had successfully secured jobs came back and they taught the next set of students as sort of like teaching assistants almost. We called them teaching fellows. And that was like our best way of kind of like making sure that the voice of the community, the voice of the learner was like part of our staff, so that they were the ones in the front of students sort of saying like, this is the process I went through. And now I want to help you go through that process too, and pay it forward. And I'll be on the lookout for jobs for you at my company. And so I just like loved kind of having the people who were successful play a really instrumental role in the success of the next generation. And that sort of like meant that we always kind of had an ear to the ground on, what was going on for our learners, what resonated, what didn't resonate for them.
Thank you for that. And Nitzan, we actually got a question from our audience for you about engagement of your partners. And can you share a little bit more about what that looks like? So how often are you meeting with your partners? What's the length of time and how are you tracking, metrics of success around those partnerships?
Yeah. I mean, partnerships change depending on what's going on in that moment. So for instance, like with Salesforce, I mean, we were building relationships with people all day there, like, throughout the week. Like I was talking to many different people at many different layers of the company's organizational structure, because people were helping at every level. And that was, great. We watched Salesforce go through 6 rounds of layoffs in the last 18 months. And a lot of their partner organizations or a lot of the companies that sort of would hire our people started to worry like, oh gosh, like if Salesforce is going through all these layoffs, maybe our financial situation might be in peril. And so they started to look for different talent. And that talent, quite honestly, started to go overseas much more. And there weren't as many jobs in the ecosystem as there were kind of in early 2000s and or early 2020s. And so our partnership kind of started to wane. And I say that with like sadness, it was an incredible partnership, but then it a little bit came to its end. And we decided in a very sort of sad way not to continue teaching the certification because it didn't quite feel like the in-demand skill it once was in the US. I think it will still continue to be an in-demand skill, but sort of keeping up with the market, keeping up with what is in demand requires that you sort of like are really peered into it. So they were an incredible partner until they weren't anymore. And I don't say any of that to say anything negative about Salesforce. They were great until the market shifted. So, I think when you have an active partner, there's no shortage of opportunities for communication. And we were constantly circling back to kind of talk about celebrations of people who were getting jobs. And I tried to send emails pretty frequently, like with the headline or the subject heading, like shot of inspiration, like here's a couple of people that just got hired this week. And like this came from this relationship or that relationship. And we would send that, throughout our many, many relationships throughout the company so that people could feel like, wow, like this is a really great collective effort and I want to be a part of it. And, there's no way that you can sort of short shrift relationship building and short shrift connection. And to be honest, like also in person, the more you can sort of show up in person, the better, which I know, it's less convenient than being on Zoom. It's more expeditious. And I certainly prefer to stay in my house too. But like, just sort of like being as many opportunities as you can to find excuses to be in front of people, to email, to check in, to remind them of the role that they're playing and helping to make an impact. Like all of those things really go a long way to furthering the more opportunities for collaboration in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you for that specificity. Really, really helpful. And Nicole, we have a comment from Hillary Hahn. And she is sharing that the support that the foundation has given to Mom's Partnership has really been transformational for some work in Bangor. Would you like to share just a little bit more about that? It's a public-private partnership, is it? Yeah.
It is, yeah. So we support an initiative in Bangor. It's a partnership between the Bangor Housing Authority and the Bangor Boys and Girls Club. And their initiative is called Moving Families Forward. It's a 2-gen initiative doing great things. And we have a 5-year commitment to them. And we test a lot of strategies with them, all in the realm of education, employment, social capital, wealth and assets, and health, both mental and physical. And so when they identify something happening in the community, they let us know and we work with them on developing a strategy. And so they came to us and said, we have a lot of moms who've recently moved in who appear to have maternal depression, or a lot of moms who seem very isolated. And so they asked us if we could help find a model. And we identified moms as being a really relevant strategy for this group, for this population. And worked with them on how to make sure that fit and, would this work? And then we went to the state and said to DHHS, our friends there, and said, this seems like if this could work in Bangor, it could work elsewhere in the state. So if we could partner with you, you could support this piece of it, we could support that piece of it, we'll pay for an evaluation. And if in fact we find that it's effective, you continue to support it and take it elsewhere. Of course, well, I should say they agreed. It has been incredible. We hear from women all the time talking about what a difference it's made in their lives. And the research is bearing that out, the evaluation. Of course, the state and federal dollars have been cut substantially, so they haven't been able to take it elsewhere. That said, because we have these close partnerships, we were able to go to them and say, let's find another way forward. I know you think that this pool of money is dried up, but what if we use SNAP ENT dollars? Is there a way forward there? So we are now in discussions around how we might work together to continue this and bring it to other communities in Maine. Hillary's done amazing work.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Really important, and love to see all of those examples of how philanthropy is partnering to with others to support your common goals again, right? So we're almost at time, and I would just love to give each one of you just a 1 minute close. If you were giving again, kind of a best insight, best guidance on partnerships or an opportunity around partnerships that really center community, are about innovation and really driving towards family well-being and economic mobility, please share.
I'm happy to start. I just want to say, I think we could never do the work we do without all of our partners. And we wouldn't have all of our partners if we didn't take the time to build those relationships. So, we can go to DHHS, or we could go to a bank, a local bank, and work with them, or whatever it is, because we spend time first developing the relationship, explaining what's important to us and what we're trying to accomplish, hearing, stopping, and really listening to what their issues are, what they're grappling with. And so when the time comes that there's an opportunity, we have those relationships already and we can go straight to them. And I think you just can't, I couldn't emphasize enough how important the relationship building, whether you have an opportunity or not, is.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll go next. I think information is key, and I think partnerships are important. I think there's a lot of folks here on the call that are on the funder, not profit side. Find some for-profit companies that are employing some of the people you're trying to help and get to know them, right? They can act as partners in a lot of different ways. There are things you can do to help them that they don't even know yet because they haven't had the runway to get their head up to come out and see what's out there. Things I've heard today from both of my colleagues are things that would be helpful in running my business and helping my employees create better lives for them, and then they're better employees for us. And you'll find that many of those employers are doing it the old-fashioned way. They're trying to do it themselves. They're trying to be good employers, and they're trying to be friends at the same time, and that's fine. We want to have people doing that from a social entrepreneurship standpoint. But if we've got third-party funders, third-party partners who want to come in and say, "Hey, can we look at it in a different way?" I think those conversations are important, but you might have to knock on our door.
Wonderful. Thank you, Al. Nitzan, you get to round the panel out.
Okay, I wanted to talk about the research of weak ties. I don't know how much people are familiar with this concept, but conventional wisdom would say that it's people we know really, really well. We call those people strong ties. Maybe people we've worked together with over a overlapping number of years, like who just know us, know our work really, really, really well. Those are the people that we would think are the ones that refer us into jobs. And that is true. They do. Strong ties do refer us into jobs, and they refer us to opportunities, and they're, likely to want to collaborate with us. But it's actually weak ties, people we don't know all that well, who are even who statistically and through research we now know are even more open to making connections, making referrals. People maybe we've had one interaction with, or two, or three, but certainly less than 100. And to me, that is the most exciting part of partnerships, is that we do need to get to know people in an authentic and non-transactional way. But we can start with people that we don't know all that well. And I feel really wonderful connections with people over many years, but that start out as weak ties. And already something big can happen with people that you don't know that well. And we teach this a lot to our learners and to our college partners of there's a lot more to leverage than meets the eye when you think about strong ties and weak ties. and the many opportunities that can come from both, as opposed to thinking the only way you can do something is if you know them for a very long time and know them very, very, very deeply. You can sort of take opportunities to build weak ties into strong ties, but you can start connections and partnerships in that weak tie phase.
Wonderful. Thank you. And what a perfect way to end this conversation with that information about, how to be looking at different levels of relationship, right? To expand them. So thank you, Al, Nicole, Nitzan, for joining this webinar and conversation about how businesses are a really important partner in supporting family economic well-being. And two-generation approaches. Deeply appreciate your expertise and sharing your knowledge in this area. And so for Ascend, I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions that were submitted. We will follow up with information responding to the questions that we actually didn't get to and some additional resources. Our next webinar will be on June 17th from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We welcome you back to learn more about 2Gen investments, particularly looking at the public sector. Ann Mosley, who's our founder and executive director, will be leading that conversation with some Ascend fellows. So thank you for joining us. Be well, everyone.